Hardware being a step from Texas into the desert did have a unusual beginning in that it started with a simple phone call. Matt Sorum, who everybody loves as the drummer from The Cult, he was with Guns N' Roses, Velvet Revolver, and in the background I heard the voice of left-handed guitar player, your friend and mine, Austin Hanks, and this was back in June, and they had just about had enough of staying at home and wanted to get back into action, and they said, we have discovered a recording studio out near Joshua Tree. And I said, oh yeah, that must be Rancho de la Luna. And they said, well, it's close. I said, well, I worked with Queens of the Stone Age at Rancho de la Luna. They said, no, it's close. It's just across the street. And they said, we're going to come pick you up and we'll take you by. I said, great, great. I kind of know that part. It's very close. It's in the middle of the desert. What they didn't say was just across the street and 20 miles into the back of the desert. But that's basically an interesting way that we got Hardware started. And once again, you're absolutely correct. From Texas to the desert and then into rock and roll madness. The desert can be talked about. You can probably pick up some references. You can read about it, even study photographic references to the desert. But there's something magical, something mystical. There is an energy that will take over. And once you're in the desert, you can make of it what you will. We found it to be quite stimulating, and it was very supportive to uplifting and get that creative process started. So there's a lot to be said about the desert. I know that there's a lot of folks that have been to the desert, and when you're there, something does take over. It's very interesting. We started out making the trip into the desert with nothing more than the thought of maybe inspecting the studio. And as far as instruments, guitars, drums, you name it, all we had was a pen, and we were looking for paper. So in answer to that question, we literally started from scratch. We started with nothing. And when we speak of nothing, you're out there in the desert. The most you could really write about would be a lot of sand, some rocks, there's cactus trees, and a lot of rattlesnakes. So with nothing, the way to get the ball rolling is to start something. And basically we took the energy and ran with it. We looked around in the studio and we decided to pick up what was laying about. The guitar was a very old Fender Jazzmaster, which was plugged into a very old Fender reverb tank, which was plugged into a very old Fender amplifier. And I looked across at Matt, and he was smiling because Austin was playing upside down and backwards, as he usually does. But Matt found a fairly decent set of drums, so off we went. But the sound was quite the antithesis of being in the desert. The sound of the guitar was pure surf. And we were looking for the water, but at least we had the sound. So the imprint of the desert showed up in a very unpredictable manner, in that this surf sound showed up in the very first track, which was West Coast Junkie. I'm a West Coast junkie from a lonesome Texas town. And it was enough to bring a smile to our face. We were really having a good time from the very start, so we just picked up sticks and pressed onward. Well, yeah, when you think about Billy F. Gibbons and the BFGs, it's a trio, 2 guitars and drums, but the bottom end is certainly present. And we do that in a rather unusual fashion on the live performance stage. In the studio, it became a race to get into the control room and grab the one Fender bass guitar, which fortunately got passed around. Now, I can speak about Austin Hanks. You know, I call him the inside out and backwards guitar player, but he plays a fine upside down and backwards bass, which got passed over to the 2 engineers, Mike Fiorentino, Chad Slosser, and surprise, surprise, on to Matt Sorum, who plays great drums, and he also plays great bass guitar. So it was quite a roundabout provision, bringing in that supportive bottom end. Matt Sorum is definitely that, as you point out, that is a great word, versatile, being beyond the expected bombastic battering ram that he can be. The subtle surprises really added a texture to these recordings that started off pretty raucous with West Coast Junkie, and then toward the conclusion of the sessions, we ended up getting close to, I wouldn't call it a ballad necessarily, but we were winding things up. And the last day, next to last day, was a list of elements that we had all felt and gathered up from the experience of being in the desert. And we decided to lay these reference words against this music track, a sound which probably should be used in a cowboy film. But I said, well, let me take a shot at it to see if these lyrics will fit. And I said, I don't have a melody picked out yet. I'll just talk my way through it. And through one take, both the engineers, Chad and Mike, came in waving their arms. They said, you got it, you got it. I said, yes, but I was talking. We were not singing. And they said, the message has been delivered. And so with that one take, we kept it. That was a nice way to near the conclusion. I know you were asking earlier about just that, the conclusion. As we were waiting for things to wind up, we were each playing DJ, and it came around, and I started playing a song which had been familiar from both the Sir Douglas Quintet and later the Texas Tornadoes. It was a composition by the keyboard player, the famous Texas Vox organist, Augie Myers. The song being, Hey Baby, Que Paso? And it just so happened I had a copy of the original single. It preceded the Texas Tornadoes, which preceded the Sir Douglas Quintet. This was something very interesting, and everybody jumped at the question, where did you get that version? We've heard other bands do it of many times, but we've never heard this version. I said, well, this is Augie Myers' original track of the song, and they said, well, we really like it, but we can't quite figure out the second verse. Could you play it again? Well, after many playbacks, we still couldn't figure out the second verse, which prompted a call down to San Antonio. We tracked Augie down, and he was actually delighted to know that we were playing the original version. But when it came time to answering the question, what's the words in the second verse? He He said, well, what do you think it is? And I said, well, we've been playing it for the better part of an hour. And he said, well, when we were looking for a Spanish line to rhyme with San Antone, he said we couldn't quite conjure up the las palabras, the words. He said, so I will give you credit if you can make up your own second verse, but it has to be fake Spanish. I said, would that be Spanglish? He said, no, that would be Slanglish. So there you have it. That was actually, we went from Desert High to close it out with Hey Baby, ¿Qué pasó? No matter where you are, you can lay claim to being a part of the Lone Star State when you sing Hey Baby, ¿Qué pasó? Yes. The content within hardware does stray from a kind of referential, even reverential expectation of what a ZZ Top sound would deliver. When the studio doors swing open, of course, in comes a bit of the blues, in comes some of that familiarity with ZZ Top. And at the same time, being in a songwriting creative mode with basically something so new and different, the report turned out to be identifiable as a little bit of that ZZ, a little bit of that blues, with a lot of this new thing. And we kind of enjoyed the familiarity of what a ZZ Top production, a ZZ Top composition would come to mean. But this went off in such a radical new, I'd say a departure. It wound up being a statement that was overall quite pleasing. It's still loud, it's still rock, and I think when you set the needle in the groove, you'll hear it. Yes, when it comes to delivering the guitar part, a lot of it seemingly would be thought better off worked out in advance. And in so doing, you could say, oh, well, if we want to get something new, let's work it out. And at the same time, the excitement that was surrounding us in the studio, by and large, was quite the opposite. We were just diving in and letting it fly. And I believe that Austin Hanks' influences combined with Matt's backbeat led me into new fields. And at the end of the day, we had gone into some very unusual spots that it had enough feeling that could be identified as maybe a ZZ sound, but here we are off into this new place. But again, you'll feel it when you hear it. The challenge was to get the ball rolling. We were stuck, in this remote location without our familiar gear. We were picking up sticks and laying them down from stuff that was in the corner, just kind of making do with what was around us. The good news is that within the second week, we started reaching out for the gear that we had ordered up. I guess you could call it some of our favorite stuff. In fact, it would be fair to say that I'd be kind of lost going through a series of sessions without the presence of the cornerstone sounding guitar, Pearly Gates, the 1959 Sunburst Les Paul. And sure enough, after the delivery truck started the unloading process, here came Pearly. Matt had his favorite Gretsch drums. Austin was, believe it or not, he was happy with what he had found in the corner. So it was a little bit of that, and we finally found our way. But the opening moments found these new sounds becoming, they were very magnetizing. We found it quite appealing. So we didn't leave it behind, we just embraced it all. Joe Hardy, our engineer of many years. A lot of folks knew him as Joe Party Hardy, and when you flip through the liner notes on the record itself, we didn't pass up the opportunity to make that very reference, Joe Party Hardy. He was a great engineer. He was a great songwriter. His influences can be heard from throughout when we first arrived in Memphis, way back in the early 70s. We drew upon the presence of John Hampton, engineer, Terry Manning, engineer, and of course Joe Hardy. Those three engineers were the backbone at Ardent Recording in Memphis. And through the years, it was, I think, Joe's humorous asides. It was never the control room was never an antiseptic experience. It was quite lively. And I think that Joe's very being, whether he was working with ZZ Top or on our solo projects or even other bands that would come in, they found it quite uplifting to be back in a place that could be kind of foreboding, kind of chilly, but it would soon warm up when Joe arrived and got it underway. So yes, the title of the record, Hardware, is in righteous respect in memory of Joe Party Hardy. Yes, Vagabond Man tells the story not only of our personal experience, but it reaches out and touches every not only traveling musicians, but those that have been struck with wanderlust and have to get out. The word vagabond itself can easily be tagged on a wide range of individuals who just, and I like the way you put it, Andy, you can't sit still. And Vagabond Man is it's a poignant statement that comes, the feelings were erupting, and we fortunately got it down. And I believe it's fair to say that it sums up decades of just wandering about. And we still like it. And believe it or not, during this shutdown, the mind was still able to wander. And well, let's play Vagabond Man. You can hear it. She's on Fire. It's one of the interesting tracks that I want to use the word well, unfolded as mild compared to the explosive nature behind it. As we mentioned, the studio was a full 20 miles back to the nearest point of civilization. However, we found, with fortune, a little Mexican restaurant that was the first stop from down the hill. And we met the young lady that was the owner. She was the cook. She was the bookkeeper. She was the everything of this great Mexican restaurant. And we were 6 weeks into the project, and we came down as we were doing daily. And when the door opened to the restaurant, we noticed it was on fire. And we jumped back, and luckily we caught sight of the young lady came dashing around the corner. She says, "Don't worry, I'm not burning up your breakfast." Said, "I'm going to get this under control in a minute." So, needless to say, we left having enjoyed great Mexican food, and now we had a great idea for a song. Literally, She's on Fire. And with that enthusiasm, it took us right back to past the control room, into the performance room. And it started off with this really interesting guitar riff. And Matt fell behind Austin and I. And it became one of the truly upbeat, up-tempo numbers from the record. It's also one of our favorites. We all got to sing on it, and we were fighting to see who was going to be able to sing She's on Fire, because we all knew her, and she was literally on fire. But that, in a nutshell, is it's a good sliver of what transpired through a lot of the compositions. The title itself, More, 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 is exactly the opposite of Love Lost, which I guess we could actually call it less, less, less. And at the same time, we enjoyed kind of the up-tempo-ness of what would usually be called a very sad song. But there again, we're about having a good time, so there you have it. On that note, you do get more, more, more. Larkin Poe came aboard after the track Stackin' Bones had taken shape, and I threw out the name Larkin. We were just hanging around the studio, and we were talking about things we had enjoyed from the previous year, traveling about. And the previous tour had the reward of working with a great blues player, Mr. Tyler Bryant. And every afternoon I'd pass his dressing room, and there were two young gals that were quite attractive. And then I would see them not only in the dressing room, I'd see them backstage every day, sometimes in the catering room. And finally, I got around to asking Tyler, I said, "Gee whiz," I said, "I see these young gals hanging around your dressing room. They seem to be following the tour around. Are they wardrobe consultants? Are they designers?" And he said, "Well, if you come to the sound check this afternoon, you'll see they're quite the talented performers. They actually have a band named after them, Larkin Poe." And it was at that moment when I decided to jump off the tour bus. I came in, and here they were, guitars in hand, laying it down like nobody's business. And I said, "Gee whiz, that's for me." And they made the excursion way out to the desert, and this is no easy task. And at the same time, there is kind of an alluring element to bringing somebody out to these remote spots. And they jumped at the chance. So we put them to work, and Stacking Bones kind of started stacking up with layers of Larkin Poe's talents. It was really good. The notion of limiting ourselves to the famous 3 beats. Coming out of the ZZ Top camp, you'll hear Frank Beard, the man with no beard, and Dusty Hill, as well as myself, leaning on the shuffle, the cut shuffle, and the monkey beat. And as the sessions for Hardware continued to unfold, it was Matt that showed up early one day, and as we entered the entered the studio, he was working out a badass Texas shuffle, and he was asking me, you know, do we go around this corner? Do we come back around this corner? And I said, well, let's just write something. And then we got underway, and as Austin walked in, he said, yeah, he said, I'm going to slide on in. He was actually playing slide. And there you have it, shuffle, step in, and slide. But it's a fun tune. It's really, really something we like. What is Spanish Fly? That is the recurring question, and we're still not sure where to take it. Now, I've got a buddy in California, just down the street here, that drives one of my favorite hot rod cars. It's a 1946 Ford. It's a 2-door sedan, and emblazoned on the door is the name he has graced his fine ride with, Spanish Fly. And I've always wanted to drive it, but he's never been around when I've gotten off the road. So I decided to write a song with the title in hopes that one day I'd slide behind the wheel. So it can be a reference to Bobby Walden's 46 Ford, and then of course if you get down by the La Frontera, the Mexican border, it takes on an aphrodisiac quality as well. So there's some fun to be had within the lyrics of Spanish Fly. Go figure that one out. And speaking, easy for me to say, speaking of figuring it out, we come to one of the tracks which was directly inspired from another power trio, one of our favorites, when Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker, and Eric Clapton joined forces to start Cream. And one of the peculiar numbers was SWLABR. And it's hard to pronounce using just those consonants and vowels. We got as far as Some Women Like, and we decided to make that a stepping stone toward, I'll let the listeners learn to figure out what's behind the rest of it.
But some guys like.
Some guys like, some gals like. I guess we could go, yes, it's yeah, a dual gendered number. Yeah, having been tiptoeing through this crazy world for now over 5 decades, the old saying is, long as we're in there somewhere. And you know, you look up and you say, gee, where did 5 decades go? We've got fond recollections of a starting point, obviously, up till the present. And we like the fact that it's continuing to snowball. And we're more than delighted to keep moving in a forward motion. So yeah, we dig it. The solo excursions do present an opportunity to enter that nether world of places that we've not experienced or gone through. It does offer a bit of refreshment. You kind of go back to square one. What I like about the balancing between a ZZ Top experience and a solo excursion in another direction, there's a value in latching on to that which is familiar. It brings us back to the square one, we call it. And yet, on the other hand, in that balancing on the other side of the vortex is another square one. And you put it all together and it seems to work out. I like the fact that Frank and Dusty are very supportive in saying, hey, yeah, go to work. And I said, well, while I'm working, I'll send you some ideas. And they said, great. So in essence, the clock keeps ticking, and we still find our ways into enjoying that balance. There's enough Texas to take in all of the desert, and in as much as you go through the Southwest. Now, when we speak of the desert, we're not talking about one confined geographical spot. It runs the gamut. Desert experiences around the planet, but in particular, the Great Southwest, which really starts in Texas and moves west all the way to the coast. I think that it would be hard, I would be hard pressed to put it into words as we move through the different locales where deserts exist. We're still Texan through and through, and that part of the desert experience still waves the Lone Star State flag is still flowing. Yes, this great slowdown, this great lockout of things that are so familiar has really lit the fuse and started the kettle boiling. And I think as we see the excitement percolating, we're only happy to step back, take the stage, and present what we're best known for is come on out and have a good time. And the phrase is sooner than later, and that's where we're headed. The opening track, My Lucky Card, as you point out, has a very interesting twist from a very personal standpoint. As mentioned, it was Matt Sorum, Austin Hanks piling into the hot rod, picking me up, and when we arrived in the desert, we decided to stay and light the fuse there. Matt's lovely sweetheart, whose name is Ace, happens to be kind of a always present presence, and she is Matt's lucky card, as well as bringing a joyful experience to this trio of mad scientists working away in the studio. So Ms. Ace became our lucky card. She was there shortly after our arrival, and it was then and there I said, "Gee whiz, let's we gotta write a song about just that, our lucky card." Yes, the total isolation is broken by the small group that either tiptoes through or gets an invitation to come pay us a visit. The tight-knit group, of course, is the 5 individuals socked away in this locked environment. And that in itself, it gets real interesting. To be totally isolated prevents you from having any kind of exchange. So opinions start to really count. We're all entitled to an opinion, but without a sense of balance by bouncing it around the room with others present, it stays rather flat. And that's what we really enjoyed by, despite the fact that we were few and far between others, we were getting that fierceness, the ferociousness was never too far out of reach. It was right there. Yes, this was the second outing with Matt taking the percussion part, that big backbeat. Austin Hanks, who's not only a great guitarist, but his singing is just stunning. But it was absolutely much harder this second time, which was left us all quite by surprise, thinking we'd just walk in and let the cards fall as they may. When I say it was what part made it harder, the novelty of being in the desert had us all looking for grounding. Whereas before we were in familiar surroundings, we'd been to the studio, the same studio many times, which allowed us to kind of get down to business quickly. This time we were in amazement. We were struck with this sense of awe. And it was more difficult, I guess, from the get-go. And then as things started to thaw out, things started to speed up, and then once we got into gear, it was full speed ahead. But I liked the challenge all the way around. All of us did.